Now, let's begin. Just a reminder, all individuals in this story are over 18 years of age. Eleanor Parker paused her stride toward the exit of the chapel, her departure momentarily halted. The usual post-service murmur filled the air. The chapel served as more than just a place of worship in quaint villages like Oakhaven. It was a central social hub, a vital connection point for many. Eleanor's gaze locked onto Lauren Mitchell, who was in the process of slipping off her dark glasses. Lauren folded them neatly and began navigating the dispersing congregation. The crowd seemed to effortlessly flow around her. At nearly 5'11", she towered over most of the women present. As the chairperson of the Women's Guild and wife of the leading partner in the town's sole prominent legal practice, she commanded a certain presence. It was no surprise that people readily made way for her. A significant number of eyes in the hall followed her movements. Lauren approached Eleanor and turned to face her, her eyes sparkling with an inner light, her laughter carrying a newfound buoyancy. Eleanor had observed this from across the room and wondered if other members of the sisterhood had also taken note. Lauren had undergone a transformation, a positive one at that. While the induction of new members into the sisterhood wasn't unheard of, it was infrequent enough that most participants could only recall a handful of instances. Eleanor, like several other women in the Women's Guild, recognized the subtle indicators when an outsider crossed their path. Witnessing Lauren radiating such an aura, Eleanor felt certain that this was precisely what had transpired. "Eleanor, are you still with us?" Lauren's voice broke through her thoughts, prompting an apology. "My apologies," she responded, her eyes fixed on Lauren. "I missed what you just said." "I was asking if you were acquainted with Diane Carter." Eleanor turned and blinked slowly. She had completely overlooked Diane standing beside her. "Of course. I know Diane. We have a long history, don't we?" Taking a step back, she reassessed her old acquaintance, noticing some of the same subtle signs she'd observed in Lauren. With a smile, she dismissed the thought that Diane was single and without children to occupy her time. "Well, if, by long history," Diane retorted with a hint of bitterness, "you mean you snagged my fiancé and married him, then yes." Diane offered a casual smile to Eleanor before redirecting her attention to Lauren. Lauren's stunned expression elicited laughter from both women. "Goodness, Lauren, you're terrible at concealing your astonishment, a skill she'd never needed to cultivate. Unlike Eleanor. I mean, just look at you two. You practically resemble siblings," Lauren blurted out, immediately regretting her words when both women shot her disapproving glances. "What I meant was, you both possess such stunning figures. Any woman in this town would envy you. I certainly wouldn't mind having your physique." Eleanor offered a warm smile to the flustered woman and then waved dismissively at the compliment. "Don't underestimate your own appeal, Lauren. You possess a unique charm. I'm certain you receive ample attention." The blush that crept onto Lauren's cheeks validated Eleanor's suspicions. She watched Lauren's eyes scan the room and then return to her. Following Lauren's gaze, she spotted Kevin Mitchell near the entrance. Lauren's son's eyes were glued to his mother. He only glanced at those he was conversing with out of politeness. Kevin appeared as blissful as a newlywed himself. Eleanor turned to Diane, scrutinizing her more intently. A certain luminescence resided within the woman she had previously pegged as jaded. It wasn't as pronounced as Lauren's radiance, but it was there, simmering beneath the surface. Diane couldn't suppress a nervous smile as she realized Eleanor was assessing her. "So, Diane," Eleanor finally inquired, "there seem to be numerous changes afoot. First Sandra, then Lauren and I venture to say you're on the cusp as well." "The cusp of what?" Diane asked, attempting to soften her tone. "Oh, I'm not entirely certain," Eleanor responded slowly, narrowing her eyes slightly. "Is there perhaps a new gentleman in your life?" Diane's laughter was a touch too loud, drawing glances from nearby attendees. "You know I've sworn off dating. I'm not about to get entangled with some middle-aged windbag who expects me to wait on him hand and foot. Although," Eleanor pressed, "there is someone new in your life." "Oh, didn't I mention it? Perhaps I'll snag your son Matthew, and then I can address you as mother." Lauren recoiled slightly at the fury that briefly flared in Eleanor's eyes. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, and Eleanor silently cursed her lapse in composure. "Well, that simply wouldn't happen," she replied icily. "And why is that?" Diane pressed, relishing the momentary crack in Eleanor's otherwise impeccable facade. Let's just say, if you did, I would end you. Eleanor turned to Lauren and embraced her. In a hushed tone, she whispered, "We must schedule a luncheon soon." Releasing Lauren, she shook her head, admiring Lauren's newfound vibrancy. Stepping back, she unfolded her sunglasses and put them on. "And for the record," Eleanor stated, not looking at Diane, but her tone left no doubt as to her intended recipient, "you could never have enticed my son unless I had orchestrated it myself." Eleanor departed, leaving the two women in her wake. "It's been over 2 decades. Why can't she just move on?" Lauren muttered, catching herself at the last moment, remembering they were still within the chapel walls. Lauren and Diane watched as Eleanor navigated the dwindling crowd and exited through the main doors into the brilliant sunshine. "I believe Matthew is indebted to me," Diane remarked cryptically. Lauren looked at her quizzically, and then Diane simply waved her hand dismissively. Matthew Parker sat in his mother's Bentley, impatiently wondering how much longer she would linger. There were Sundays when she chatted with the older women for an hour after the service, testing his patience. Sunday was his favorite day of the week, despite the mandatory church attendance, his mother's decree. "It's a small price to pay," he muttered to himself. Moments later, a broad smile spread across his face as he saw her emerge from the building. She settled into the driver's seat and fixed him with a long stare, as if debating whether to speak. Matthew shifted nervously, wondering if he'd inadvertently incurred his mother's displeasure. Was she contemplating his punishment? Her lips curved into a knowing smile, and then she started the car and swiftly exited the parking lot. "Call home," Eleanor instructed, and the radio cut out as a phone began ringing through the car speakers. A moment later, a cheerful voice answered, "Hi, Dad and I are waiting for you both to get home. The union ceremony, remember?" Matthew's sister Rachel said excitedly, before disconnecting the call. Matthew couldn't suppress his grin as they arrived home. He leaped out of the car and rushed inside, spotting his younger sister hurrying up the stairs, clutching a clear vinyl bag. "The union ceremony!" he exclaimed, and Rachel squealed with delight. He bypassed the staircase and headed towards the study, located at the rear of the house. A short while later, both men emerged dressed in formal attire, and his father led him outside into the garden. Handing Matthew a pair of shears and taking a pair for himself, his father instructed him to cut roses, red, white, and yellow. They gathered several blooms of each color and returned indoors to trim and arrange them into bouquets. "Ready?" Rachel called from upstairs. The men hurried to the bottom of the stairs, positioning themselves on either side, bouquets in hand. "Indeed," Stuart replied, his excitement mirroring Matthew's. Wedding music filled the house as the two women descended the stairs, both adorned in wedding gowns of the same hue but different designs, white veils concealing their faces. Matthew was captivated by his mother's elegance in her sophisticated gown. Rachel wore a full, flowing gown. She beamed as she descended the stairs, her smile so wide that Matthew briefly wondered if it hurt. Her eyes darted between Matthew and their father, sparkling like the diamond earrings she wore, as they both gazed at her with admiration. Upon reaching the bottom, Eleanor accepted the flowers offered by her son. Rachel did the same with her father's offering. Hand in hand, they walked in pairs to the sunroom, which offered a panoramic view of the valley where Peterson's lumber mill had originally stood. They arranged themselves so that Eleanor stood with her son before her and her husband to her right. Before Rachel stood her father, with her brother on her right. Matthew silently lamented not having set up a camera to document this occasion. However, he knew his mother would never have permitted it. Instead, he committed every detail to memory. As a priestess of the Julian sisterhood, Eleanor began speaking in a solemn voice. She focused intently on Matthew, making him feel as though her words were directed solely at him. "I call upon my family to partake in the union ceremony. On this day, we solidify our love as a family, binding ourselves to one another above all else, vowing to hold no pledge higher than this. We offer ourselves freely. We accept the love freely given. We pledge to cherish, protect, and honor each other. We shall place no one above those with whom we unite ourselves today." Matthew glanced at his sister and smiled. He suspected she wouldn't have been any happier if it were her actual wedding day. Rachel turned and caught his gaze, her eyes widening with eager anticipation. Eleanor and Stuart ended their kiss, and then the parents turned to their children standing before them. Stuart reached out and lifted the veil from Rachel's face. Matthew turned to his mother, finding her veil still in place. She leaned closer, lowering her eyes submissively. Matthew turned back to his sister, her expression momentarily shy, before breaking into a wide grin. When their kiss ended, everyone applauded heartily, and the two women embraced. Eleanor took both Becky and Matthew by the hand and led them away. Becky grasped her father's hand, and the four of them returned to the stairs and ascended to the master bedroom. "Man, sometimes I pity anyone who isn't a part of this family," Matthew remarked. Rachel stepped closer to him and said, "Why is that, my handsome brother? Just look at you. You and Mom are simply magnificent." She emphasized her words. "Oh, would you look at that?" Rachel said, stepping back. Stuart whistled appreciatively, and Rachel basked in his praise. Eleanor approached her handsome son with a look of playful intent. It still astonished Matthew how fortunate he was to have such a family. His mother's genetics alone would be a winning lottery ticket, but to also be her lover. His mind reeled at his good fortune. The entire family relished this game and often engaged in these rituals annually. It brought them all immense pleasure. So, what are your thoughts on this union ceremony?